I love when I can get under the hood of a sci-fi show. So once we get past the first non-spoilery episodes, I can kind of dig in a little bit. So I'm excited to talk about the third episode of the Peripheral called Haptic Drift right after the jump. Hello, everyone. Terrence here with Hollywood Already Did It. If you haven't already, go ahead, like, share, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, ring that bell below. Anytime we have something, you will be among the first to know. Especially with a show like this, I cannot explain to you how much it pained me not to go into spoilers on the first two episodes of The Peripheral. I'm in. I'm invested. I'm a sci-fi nut, and this taps that weird make me question everything science button in the back of my head that kind of is like, feed me more. And I do know that this is not for everybody. It's a bit of a slow moving burn. It's a slow burn. Though that Westworld audience, that Matrix audience, a little bit, though not as action heavy. But this pacing can become a problem for this show for some people. But I like the thought provoking, like Blade Runner, Dune, like the deliberately paced, if you will, sci fi thrillers. So third episode of The Peripheral is here. It is called Haptic Drift. I am watching these episodes because I know I'm a little bit behind. I'm watching this episode, doing this video, and then I'm watching the next one. So I am purposely for this show, I am not going ahead and watching two and then coming back to record both. I want to watch them sort of as it's fed to you all. We pick up after the last two episodes where Flynn and Burton have been sort of put into a precarious position. They are probably in way over their heads and they don't quite know it yet. I love that this show sort of plays with whether or not this was destiny or fate or this they had a choice to get to this point, but it seems like Flynn is kind of the quote unquote chosen one and that this path has sort of been destined for her and we don't know how perilous it gets because the future looks very bleak and very different than the present day that she is currently in. This episode opens with Corbel Pickett, slightly younger, with Jasper, very younger, and sort of him flexing his muscles and showing what it is that he is capable of doing. Does he feel like his town or what is happening in his town is feeling threatened? And he basically gets rid of this biker gang that is causing issues for his town. He does so in a very smart. He uses his brains, his wits. He tries to outsmart everyone, outsmart these folks, but he shows his nephew Jasper, who was there present as well, kind of what it is that people who get in his way or don't follow the lines that he sort of has set for this town, what he can do to them, and that's all. That's purpose is just to show you that whoever is in the future that has chosen Pickett to be the person to eliminate the Fishers, they've chosen him for a reason. They know that he's capable of doing this. They know he's done this before. So they are like, you are the person that we want to go ahead and proceed with this for the Fishers. And so then we see a sequence with him and his wife contemplating what to do with the money. That deposit is entered into his bank account, and they're just testing out the options. Do we take the money and do nothing? Do we take the money and actually kill the Fishers, or do we come up with some sort of an intermediate reason for that? And none of those really work for him. He kind of is like, maybe there's another option. And so what they come up with is maybe we should sort of attempt to get Jasper involved with him, because Jasper does have a connection via his wife being Flynn's best friend and only friend. That connection with Billy Ann and Jasper seems to be the kind of the through point, because Jasper seems to be that little. They refer to him as an idiot. He seems to be that little lapdog nephew that kind of is not as smart as Corbel is. And Corbel's well aware of it, and so he uses that to his advantage to sort of put Jasper in positions that probably would not be done were he not so dim-witted. We then see a bit of a power struggle between Burton and Flynn. They both are. They're not really working together in the real world, in real time, in the present day is what I'll call it. Burton is kind of throwing some cash around a little bit, not being overspending, but he's being a little willy-nilly with the money. And in that, he has bought the printing place that they used to work, well, they currently work at. They now own it, and he's made that Flynn's in charge of it. But that's where they're printing up new weapons and more guns to sort of amp up their ammo. And he's rented a new vehicle. Flynn's not happy with the purchases and doesn't quite see like why are you spending all this money. She also doesn't quite she doesn't originally see that Burton bought this company for them, but it also works as they haven't gotten there, but it's probably a shell company to sort of hide some of that money too, sort of another business venture that can kind of wash and launder that money, so that it doesn't seem like that money just coming out of nowhere from the lottery thing that was that was sort of put into place in the previous episode. Flynn's being a little sloppy in that she's telling people. While Burton has spent money, he has kept it all to himself. He's made up stories here and there to give information where he has to, but he's not told anybody exactly what's going on. Flynn, on the other hand, has told Billy Ann. And Billy Ann, she's told Billy Ann everything from top to bottom about the future, all of the stuff about the drone, why the drones are following them, why they're being kind of watched, if you will. She's given her every piece of the information. And Burton checks her on that, and he's furious at her for why would you do that? And she says, hey, quite frankly, it's because she's the only person that I know. Like, I don't have anybody else to talk to. You and I talk, but we're in this together. I need somebody, an outlet that I can speak to outside of you. While you have all your military friends to talk about other things and get everything off your hands, she's the only person that I can speak to other than being when I'm plugged in with the peripheral and plugged in. That's the only outlet I have. He reminds her kindly that Jasper is married to her, and Jasper is the nephew of whom. And so, why would you put yourself in that position? Because we all, I guess everybody in this world sort of knows what Corbel is capable of. Turns out he's not wrong. Flynn plugs back in, and while she's plugged in, Lev, Wilf, and the rest of the Londoners are telling her that they're trying to get a read on Alita. She's like, I can't really find one. But they're working together to try to piece the crumbs together to see where Alita may have wound up. But in that, they also tell her that, hey, there's been a high amount of traffic searching your names from the Corbel Pickett IP address. Just to give you a heads up. Do you know who this man is? And they show a little bit of what he's done in the past. It seems like an additional thing is that he was hanging up people on crosses and kind of like making a show of them that this is his town type of thing. And she's like, okay, got it. Give me an hour. Let me unplug and go and give me an hour. And then the cool things about the peripheral is still when she's not in poltergeist mode or Polt mode being taken on by Flynn. Her Polt, her non-playable character, if you will, continues on, so they can move her where they want to. They keep her box in the coffin, which she's not very happy with, but they continue on, so she can be put in different places. Every time she plugs in, she may not be where she was last at, which can be a little bit disarming. Which I think may come into play later on in the season, where she may get plugged into a spot where it's just all hell is breaking loose. That's got to be a scary thing to jump in and out of. But she unplugs and then goes to tell Burton what's going on. Wilf, we start getting a little bit of flashback about him and the actual relationship that sort of exists between he and Alita, and that they're brother and sister. Adopted, foster, if you will, almost in a way, brother and sister, and they get adopted together, but they almost get separated at that point. His name used to be Wolf, which was something that it was a name that was to be proud of, was to be heritage. The heritage was strong for a black man of that. That's all. It was all tied into that. And he willingly gave that away because they were going to separate them. They were going to choose just Alita. He's like, we're only going to adopt one, but if we have to adopt two, the father of those two asked Wolf, like, hey, can you pick up a name that's a little bit more, what they're basically saying, a nice, and the least amount of races that they can outwardly say, but being very racist, say, like, can we give something that's not so ethnic? Wolf's very ethnic. We can't take you nowhere with that name. How about we give you a name called Wilfred? We'll call you Wilf. How about that? Very, very white type of name. That's what they go for. And in that, he chooses it. He says yes. And Alita seems to be a bit disappointed. She's like, why wouldn't you stand up for your name? He's doing it because he knows that if he didn't, he probably wouldn't have been with her or been kept with her, but she's kind of like, stand up for yourself. And Mom is kind of giving that look like we may have just taken away the power of this kid, but as we learn as they grow up, she's not really about that. She truly is only in it for like the idea of being a mother, but she doesn't really want them to have actual personalities or anything. because as they grow up, Wilf goes to visit the old parents' home and try to find a clue about Alita. And they got nothing. And at that home, there's a life model, a decoy, that you can make a generic version of, but they have sort of put the face likeness of Alita on there, much to the weirdness of Wilfred. And he runs into Mom, and Mom's a cold mother. She doesn't show much affection towards Wilf, and she doesn't show much towards Alita. And Wilf kind of checks her and says, "Hey, this is a little weird. You could have just made a generic model." And she essentially lets on that like she was more comfortable with Alita being docile. Like she likes the idea of Alita, but not the actual characteristics and the personality of her. She just wants her to. She just loves her look and who she is, but not what she is and what she's become. She's also a little upset that neither of the kids showed up at the husband's funeral, which leads you to believe that there was some turmoil in that household and that they didn't have the best of relationships with their father or their mother. Clearly, the way that they sort of responded and not galvanized around her. Once unplugged, Flynn informs Burton of the info that Corbel is watching them, and has probably been asked to put a hit on them. And Burton's like, "Cool, I'm gonna go kill him." Like simple as I'm gonna go ahead and kill him. And Flynn's like, hold on. You can't just go murder him. Talk to him, figure out something, but don't kill him. And he's like, "Okay, cool." And she's like, "You promised?" And he's like, yeah. And he doesn't actually say the words "I promise," but he's like, yeah, gotcha. Because if he must, he will, but he's not gotten to the point where he feels like, let me just go have a conversation with him and see what's going on. Flynn plugs back in and is at that point in a car with Wilf, and they are heading to sort of the location where the party was at and where she was absconded upon that night and where everything sort of went in place. It's going to retrace their steps, basically. That's what they're doing. Well, as they get out the car, they're trying to retrace their steps. They sort of sync their sensories together, their feelings together, and their thoughts together, sort of in a they touch some fingers, do some sci-fi mumbo jumbo, but they basically are connected. They have melded their minds. She feels a little bit of the hangover that he has left over, and he's like, "Yeah, you're nothing but unicorns and rainbows." Put a little bit of country twang and a country song going on underneath. But they are now as one, so they can they cover more ground if they both search all around. Bird, meanwhile, meets Corbel at a restaurant, the diner. Corbel's sitting there eating, and he asks Jasper to move, and Bird and he have a conversation. And he's like, "I got a carrot and a stick." That's basically how he breaks it down. He's like, "The carrot is this. I know someone has hired you to kill us. Cool. I'm gonna give you $200,000 a week for an indefinite amount of time to not do so." And Corbel's kind of like, yeah, cool, but I'm well off. Like, this place is mine. I got this. I'm not too much concerned about what you can and can't do. But I am curious, what's the stick? And Burton goes into this long troll about the haptic, the nerves, the little things that we see sort of engraved in his skin, which are it's a haptic suit, or a haptic drift, or a haptic piece that he has connected to all of his other war veterans, war friends, that he tells a story about a time where he blacked out. He came back to and he was beating the crap out of somebody who he had never met before in his life. Turns out, because of the haptic, their sensories were connected, that this person had done something very harmful and terrible to one of his war mates back in the day. And that this was the response that came on its automatic trigger for him. What he's basically saying to Shakur was like, if you kill me or harm my sister, I have a team of an elite force that's going to come down like hellfire on you and murder you. And Corbel doesn't believe it. Corbel kind of blows it off like, I run this town. It gets very Rihanna and Jay-Z on him. I run this town. And at that point, that's when Burton has to sort of show him what's what. The haptic kind of glows a little bit. And and my man points to the glass that that Corbel is raising up. And it gets a bullet through it, shatters, and the bullet gets lodged into the wall. One of his folks, Eli, are out there at gunpoint, sniping, and ready to go at a moment's notice. And you can tell that sort of shakes Corbel a bit. He's kind of like, wait, now I don't quite know what I've gotten into. And it makes him question I don't know what I've gotten into with him, nor do I know now what the Fishers have gotten into. They're bringing something onto our land that is more dangerous than I had originally anticipated, and we're going to have to do some digging to figure this out. So they shake on the deal, but not without the police, Tommy, actually seeing the two of them shake. Charisse, the main badass villain of this, meets Daniel, her hitman, and says that, we need to speed up this process. Whatever Flynn is to them is enough of a nuisance, is enough of concern that they need to. She feels that we need to speed this up because it's starting to close in, and she threatens him and says, "Hey, I don't care what you have to do. Make this happen and be more efficient at doing so." And then that's when Daniel gives her a little bit of information that Alita went to school with Grace, one of the RIs before, and that he can meet up with her to get a little bit more information. Shriek's like, no. Handle what I told you to do. I'll go handle Grace. I got that. Flynn and Wilf are covering as much ground as they possibly can, but there's something wrong with the peripheral that she's been given. Ash has sort of given her a peripheral that is not quite coded correctly, and so as they separate, if she's not with him, it reads differently, and it comes off as an illegal product. And so one of the police officers in the future come around and start kind of tailing Flynn, and Wilf checks in with Ash, like, what the hell is this? And they learn that the peripheral just isn't registered correctly. So Wilf has to go into this whole diatribe and story about how it is Canadian. She's a Canadian woman. They're working on the work visa to get her in here. There's 10 trips. This is her second. She's been on 2. This is her 3rd trip in here. And he's like, well, we don't have her in the registry. And then he comes up with this whole story. He's good on his feet. He comes up with this whole story about how much love they have for each other, and but that he made her model like his ex-girlfriend as opposed to something more akin to her. And this is her 3rd jump back in, and she got kind of upset that she still looks like this, so she hopped out the car, got upset. Then they kissed and kind of did that thing, and then she asked, can she leave? It's a cool little way to get out of it, because at that time the officer was kind of like, yeah, go ahead, don't come back until you get this fixed, blah, 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 blah. And she unplugs. What's interesting about that scene is that they are sensory enough to have a connection, and in that, Flynn feels some type of love, some type of relationship. She now knows she's never had that before, considering most of her life she's probably taken care of her mother or been with a knucklehead brother of her, always looked for the sim to plug her in. This is the first time she's actually feeling any type of emotion like that. And remember, she's also connected sensory to Will. So she is feeling what she's actually naturally feeling, plus the amplification of whatever he's feeling to make this story feel real, or that he may actually have something for her. So it'll be interesting to see if there is any type of relationship that forms between her, or if she's kind of like reading this incorrectly because if she's never felt that before, and everything feels so engulfed with her senses at that moment. Charisse does meet Grace and starts asking questions about Alita. They're having tea in the garden, and they start asking questions about Alita. And Grace does admit that she's got Alita a position here, but she didn't tell her anything about it or anything that they do. But they're in this sort of like glass enclosure. As they're having tea, Charisse was the one who stirred stuff into the tea, like honey, what looked to be honey, and just kind of like drinking tea. Seemed nothing of it. As the conversation continues, the bees start hitting the glass and staying on the glass and kind of like just engulfing themselves around that window. And at that point, Charisse reveals that, hey, I put some stuff into your tea that is a natural attraction to the bees. And you have a family and kids. She's basically threatening her, and it's at that point the decision has already been made. And Charisse opens up that door, and those bees attack, sting her to death, and kill her. She's a cold, cold mother. She's about her business and is very matter of fact in the way that she handles things. It's very black and white with her. Jasper has a bag that Corbel has brought as he drops off his wife Billy Ann home, and there's a very simple couple. They tell each other everything. You can tell, and this is probably why Burton was so upset with Flynn. But she's going to go home to cook dinner for them, and he's like, well, I'll be in a second. I gotta go drop this bag off for my uncle. And she's like, well, hold on, it's not drugs. He's like, no, my uncle knows better than to put drugs into my bag. She don't care. She's like, no, I don't trust him. So she opens up the bag, and it's a bunch of money. So the money, unfortunately, it's the $200,000 that the first wave of $200,000 that Burton plans to give to Corbel. Jasper zips it back up and takes it out, and Billy specifically tells him, "Don't take any of that money, but make sure you give it all to him." He sits in the car as he's about to go in to take it to his uncle. He looks at it, he has some in his, he's about to take it, and he's like, "Nah, I'm not gonna take it. My wife told me not to. I'm not doing it. I listen. He's a smart man. I'm gonna listen to my wife." Takes the bag in, drops it off, and Corbel asks him, like, "Hey, do you know what's in this bag?" He's like, "No, I didn't open it. Of course I didn't open it. I'm not gonna open up anything you gave me." He's like, "Well, do you have an idea what's in the bag?" So I can kind of tell by the way that things feel. I feel like it's money. He's like, "Okay." He opens it up, pours it out. It's $200,000 that Burton has for him. And he explains that, like, this is indefinite. I'm going to get $200,000 from Flynn's weekly. What do you think about that? It's like, well, I would wonder how they came about that and why they're doing that. He's like, yeah, that's the $1,000,000 question. That's all I'm thinking about too. And he's okay, cool. And then he says, "Hey, take some." He's like, no, I can't take any. He's like, no, take it, please take it. He's like, no, I can't. And he finally does. He takes some, and then at that point, Corbin, who's always a step ahead and always thinking, especially with Jasper and the dim-wittedness of him, it's like, you should always ask somebody what they have to do or what they expect from you if they give you money. And at that point, Jasper is kind of like, oh, well, I don't want to do anything or be caught up in anything. And this is kind of why Billy was saying don't take anything. Because he knew, she's aware that Corbel probably knew how much was in that bag, and it's probably a test. If you take any, you then are sort of bequeathed, you're owned by your uncle. So don't put yourself in that situation. He just did it. Thought he got tricked into it, but he just did that. And so he tries to put the money back down, and he's like, no, you already got it. It's already yours. So I'm going to need you to do me a favor. I'm going to need you to find out what the hell's going on, or why they're, what trouble it is that they're in, because they're into something that's so big that is causing me to get money. It's a lot happening. I need you to find out what that is. Now, at this point, Jasper doesn't know that Billy Ann knows some idea of what's happening, but that leak's going to come, and it's going to come quick. And so Burton, while he has been aggressive in the way that he's sort of handling things, he's not wrong in the way that he told Flynn, like, you should need to keep this in-house because it's going to bite us in the ass. We then see Flynn talking to Burton about the haptic suit and, like, how he has the haptic connection with his war veteran. She sort of had that connection with Wilt inside. And just, how does that work, or how have you made that feel? And Burton says, hey, you got to be careful with that. It can make your senses go out of whack. It can make you feel things that you didn't think that you're not actually feeling. It can make you feel things that are heightened times to a level you've never been around before. So I had a lot of training with the haptic stuff. You have not, so just be careful with that. And that's the title of the episode, is like getting lost in somebody else's senses, as opposed to your own, where you're not in control. It's called, that's what the haptic drift is. Flynn logs in one more time for this episode, where Wilf informs her of a clue that he has. And he's like, he's got it snowing outside, but it's not real. She calls him out when this isn't real. But the clue is that this, where Jon Snow fell. They're thinking of it from the weather terms, and she's like, well, what about if it's a person? Like, I had a painting of and all this. And so they put the clues together, and they realize that it's in regards to the actual Jon Snow, and an address comes up. They go to that place, and it is the apartment of Alita. It's ransacked. It looks like somebody's been there before. But it also then leads to the sort of hospital or surgery room where the eye in the first episode was removed. That's the location that they're at. What's interesting is that they get to that hospital room via a grandfather clock that is the same grandfather clock that is at Flynn's place. And when they turn the clock to the time that the dead clock at Flynn's house is, which is 2:15, it opens up to the hospital room that is there. So there's a fascinating now kind of connection to Alita and Flynn that is more than meets the eye. That might be why he's so easily being able to connect it to Flynn. There's something where Flynn and Alita, from past to present, maybe a child, who knows, maybe her child, but there's some type of connection that they have in the 70 years that is going to sort of present itself as it goes along. Because there's also a mock model of the home that Burton and Flynn stay at. So there's a lot of reminiscing or a lot of studying her home life by just Alita, that a lot of other people in this world don't know. They see that the chip that Alita had in her head has been removed, but Wolf takes it, puts it into the pocket, and then they try to leave. As they try to leave, Daniel, our hitman, shows up with like a sonic gun and just starts wailing off on Flynn, and that is having a direct effect on Flynn in the real world. She is almost like she's going into seizures or shock. She keeps firing, and Wilf has been taken by an android, like a robotic version, and is choking him up. But there's a scalpel that was sort of knocked on the ground that he has. He stabs his robot in the head, and Flynn headbutts and goes full on, starts headbutting, and then gets a hold of that sonic gun and starts blasting off on Daniel. Does about 2 or 3, and then the final one, she's trying to get some questions for him. It's like, why did she after me so hard? What did she want with me? And Daniel is saying that Charisse is after Flynn because she took something. And that is all that she can get, because the robot then opens up an eye, and it's the eye of Charisse watching from wherever she's at, from her tower. And then she kills Daniel before he can speak anymore. It is at that point that Flynn shoots the droid in the head and severs the connection, and then we just see what appears to be a level of anger, but also like, okay, now I see what I'm getting at. Now I see who I'm fighting. Now I see that she's more than just somebody I can just wipe off the board. So it's almost like anger, but also a sort of assurance of respect that Charisse has in that moment. She just kind of folds her legs and like, all right, I'm gonna have to bring that thunder on this heifer because she don't come with it. And that's the episode. It has my favorite 2 scenes in this entire episode is the Pickett and Burton scene at the diner with the gun. That story of him telling the carrot and the stick. It's beautifully done, and it shows you a little bit about the character of both of them. There are a lot of just small character moments that tells you who these people really are. I think the Wilf and how quickly he was able to think on his head about keeping Flynn out of trouble with the Canadian line was great. I think opening with the Jasper Corbel, who they were when he was younger and what they've become now, and how he's able to manipulate Jasper so well, it was all came together and wove together quite nicely. This is a really well done episode that made me fall even more in love with it. It's a bit long. I think it's the longest one maybe so far. It's an hour and 12. But I think it tells the story, all the pieces, and tells the story, takes the time that it needs to tell the story that it needs to tell. I think we have now learned that there's a bigger attachment between Flynn and Alita that we were led to believe. They may in some way be related, but for her to have a house relic in her apartment, and then that the house models something, is more than the eye. And I am curious to see if they deal with any of what the future looks like, because we learn in this that when Flynn's talking to Billy Ann, that there's not nearly as many people in the future as there are currently, and Wilf seems to be one of the few people of color outside of Charisse. And with that, the way that they play that adoption situation, it seems like racism may still exist in some level in the future, and I kind of want to hope they dig in a little bit more to that too. All in all, a really, really solid, well-paced, well-done episode. What did you guys think about the 3rd episode of The Peripheral called Haptic Drift? Leave your thoughts and comments in the comments below. If you haven't already, you can follow us on Twitter at Hollywood80i. You can hit us up on email at HollywoodRDigit@gmail.com. We also have the podcast with the same name. It's on Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere that plays podcasts, we're there. I have not watched the next episode, so if some of these things, while this is going up a little later, if some of the things have been answered in the subsequent episode, I purposely did not watch so I can get my thoughts first, then I'm going to go watch the next one. So I will have that one up. They're pretty much going to go up at the same time, so they'll be back to back. But that is why you don't hear me conjecturing about things that may have actually taken place. I don't know yet. But like always, I got my ticket. You got yours.